Welcome.
It is really my honor on behalf of the people of Wheatland-Salem United Methodist Church to welcome all of you. And tonight we're going to examine the state of mental health care today. We're going to learn about how 708 mental health boards work and the state statute that guides them. And we will learn how these mental health boards would address the needs of our local communities. It is really my great privilege at this time to welcome and introduce Susan Craighead, President of the Naperville League of Women Voters. Susan, welcome.
The League of Women Voters is nonpartisan and political. That means we take a stand on issues of importance, such as access to health care. Mental health care is health care, but the barriers to accessing mental health care continue. Funding should be tied to identified needs and effectiveness of services. Innovative ways to improve the delivery of community-based mental health services should be encouraged. That's why we're here tonight talking about 708 mental health boards. This is election season, and we are here to educate and inform so that you can make the best decisions. Information on 708 mental health boards will be included in our online voter guide, vote411.org, and you'll find other candidate information there. We hope that tonight's presentation gives you a lot to think about, and we hope that you will not hesitate to ask questions. There are index cards and pens that I'll pass out to anyone who would like to ask a question. Please write legibly. And now I'd like to return it back to Erica.
Thank you, Susan. Welcome to our panel conversation tonight, and again, thank you to Reverend Zaki and the congregation for graciously hosting us, and to the League of Women Voters of Naperville for co-hosting this educational event. On September 21st, a forum on substance use disorders and the 708 Community Mental Health Referendum was held in Schaumburg. You may view it online on the Facebook page for Mental Health Boards for DuPage and Facebook page Advocates for 708 Boards, and we'll make sure that we share that information with you again. The conversation tonight will center on mental health, and we welcome 4 panelists who bring decades of knowledge and personal and professional experience to this subject. Let me introduce each panelist and highlight a few of these experiences. To my right is Suzanne Baber. The mission of Teen Parent Connection, where Suzanne is Director of Program Operations, is to serve the community through education on the realities and responsibilities of teenage pregnancy and through long-term assistance to adolescent parents for their development of self-esteem, parenting skills, and empowerment towards self-sufficiency. Since 1985, Teen Parent Connection has delivered education, support, and resources to adolescent parents and their children in DuPage County, Illinois. Their primary goal is to provide services that will prevent child abuse and neglect among this at-risk population. Suzanne, as Director of Program Operations, has been with the agency for 10 years. Suzanne completed her undergraduate degree at UCLA and earned a master's degree in Social Service Administration from the University of Chicago. Her background includes experience in integrated behavioral health and perinatal health quality improvement. She is a licensed social worker, holds certificates in trauma-informed practice and policy and healthcare quality improvement. Welcome, Suzanne. Jerry Kurger, to my left, Director of NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, DuPage. NAMI DuPage's mission is to provide support, advocacy, and education in order to improve the quality of life for individuals with mental illnesses and their families. The array of services include community education, youth services, supported employment, and recreation and social programs. Jerry became Executive Director in 2019 and has over 20 years of experience in the area of nonprofit development. She is an attorney and has a graduate degree in guidance and counseling, and describes NAMI DuPage as an organization dedicated to improving the lives of those living with mental illness and their families. She is grateful to work with a dedicated staff, passionate volunteers, and community partners to make mental health a priority for all. Welcome, Jerry. Tammy Mackey, NAMI, Will Grundy County. Tina is the president of the local National Alliance for Mental Illness, NAMI, serving residents of Will and Grundy counties. Tina is a licensed facilitator for the Family to Family program, the Mental Health First Aid and Young and Youth Mental Health First Aid programs, whose goal is to recognize the signs and symptoms of emerging issues associated with the onset of mental illness. Tina has been employed for the past 13 years at Cornerstone Services, serving individuals diagnosed with mental illness. She serves on the Will County Board of Health and is an active participant in the Illinois State Board of Education Social and Emotional Learning Task Force. In October 2020, Tina was presented with the Reverend James E. Allen Award for Service to the Community by Project Acclaim. Welcome, Tina. Thank you. Mike Murray, to my right, worked as the leader of a grassroots referendum committee for the creation of a 708 Community Mental Health Board for Bloomingdale Township, the first community mental health board in DuPage County, so that was quite a feat. From talking with friends and neighbors, he knew there were many unmet needs for people with mental illness, substance abuse, and developmental and intellectual disabilities. In 2017, Bloomingdale Township approved the referendum to create this first 708 Community Mental Health Board in DuPage County, and Mike established the Bloomingdale Township Mental Health Auxiliary Facebook page group, not affiliated with the township, but to promote the work of the board and communicate the needs of the community. Last year, this board, Bloomingdale Township, awarded nearly $1 million in grants while tackling many of the unmet needs in the community. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you very much.
Let's begin with an overview of the state of mental health today, and the way that we'll proceed tonight is to have this be a Q&A with the panel and have them also kind of springboard off of each other's comments as appropriate in order to fill in some of those gaps that might be needed in terms of knowledge for the community. There's been a lot of news from a broad array of sources that the need right now in terms of mental illness and mental health is especially great. How do you see that reflected in your organizations? And Jerry, let's start with you, NAMI DuPage.
Okay, thank you, Erica, and thank you all for coming this evening and for watching it on the live stream. I think most people who work in mental health, most people who work in nonprofits, and people who have been impacted at all by mental health know that mental health has been in a crisis for the past several decades in the United States, and that crisis was just exacerbated by the pandemic. We went from having 10 to 15% people reporting depression to over 40%. You know, the rates of anxiety and depression, not only for some areas tripled, and for others they quadrupled. What that means is that we never, before the pandemic, we didn't have enough services to meet the needs, but now we have far more people seeking help, And many of the people seeking help have extremely complex needs that came out of the pandemic. So what we're seeing is not just people, I mean, it's terrible to have anxiety and depression, but for many of those folks, we've also added in substance use disorder now. So, or family, there are many domestic issues that happen, more crime, things like that. So we have much more complicated situations. And I think people that have a loved one with mental illness know that there's a tremendous shortage of psychiatrists. Parts of this country, there just aren't psychiatrists. We're fortunate, we have them here, but there aren't enough of them. And for people that think I have a good Blue Cross and Blue Shield policy, let me tell you, it doesn't matter what you have, you're still probably going to wait 3 months for a psychiatrist. So I think what we've seen was a long time coming. We saw, particularly with youth, we saw teenage and younger kids that are dying by suicide increase tremendously. And right now, one of the highest demographics for suicide are girls 10 to 14 years old. And there are kids younger than 10 who are dying by suicide. So we saw the start of it before the pandemic, but what the pandemic has done to young people is really almost unimaginable in terms of mental health, anxiety, depression, and planning suicide. It's really a very difficult spot, and it is a crisis that we really, the sooner, and the thing is, with all mental health crises, we always believe that there's hope for recovery, but you'll never recover if you don't get the treatment.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Tina, let's go to you, and I would add this other piece. You can talk a little bit about Will and Grundy counties, but Jerry's kind of brought up this issue that needs to be addressed, and that is the cost to society. So can you speak to that a little bit as well?
A little bit. Yeah, we certainly understand that, again, that to add to your comments, the exacerbated situation as a result of the pandemic, there's a couple of things that we know for sure, that the median onset age for anxiety disorders is 10 years old. The median onset age of anxiety disorders is 10 years old. We also know that the average time before a person gets effective, efficient care for a diagnosis of mental illness or even emerging signs and symptoms of mental illness is 10 years. That's the average amount of time right now, the average. And as a result of the pandemic, people are saying even longer. So imagine you're a 10-year-old is walking around for 10 years thinking, you know, there's something wrong with me. Something's not right. I'm not good. I'm no good. I'm not worthy. After 10 years, you can imagine the kinds of services that that person who's lost out on childhood and adolescence and forget about any kind of self-esteem, you know, that person has been walking around all that time with so many challenges and struggles that we're starting to try and provide services as an adult to a person that it's almost insurmountable odds to try and help that person at 20 years old or 25 years old. So when we talk about the costs, we're talking not just about the dollars and cost to our society, but we're losing our children. We're in huge numbers. And so again, speaking for NAMI Will Grundy and some of the things happening in Will County, our mission, of course, like most NAMIs, is to provide services for individuals diagnosed with mental illness and their families. But we really, as our visions, are hopeful to implement a paradigm shift and look at programs and services for children that literally start in first grade and start educating children and their families. You know, the stigma of a diagnosis of mental illness is still so pervasive in our communities that not only do families hesitate to reach out for help when you sort of have this gut feeling, hey, something's not right here, families are still hesitant to reach out, and children then pay the price, and too walk around sort of afraid to say too much. So educating our communities, making clear that mental illness is a brain disease and that we just have to do better for our kids. We just have to do better. And again, the costs, I think when we talk about 708 boards, you mentioned I serve on the Board of Health for Will County. You know, everything has a price for it, but when we talk about services for mental health at a township or county government or city level, we're competing with road repairs and ambulances and environmental health and wellness and medical provision of services. And so sometimes mental health just doesn't make it to the top of the list. On the other hand, every single piece of data that we receive about the needs of the community, pick any one of us, pick any community, any county, any forum. When you look at the data, mental illness always tops the list as the #1 need over and over and over again. So, you know, the costs are something that we really need to learn to evaluate better, where we're competing against other costs for cities and governments, and those things, of course, are important. But if you look at the data, mental illness is going to be more costly every day that goes by that we don't get into the schools, collaborate with other agencies, and work together to better educate children and families about their needs and support services that, again, are efficient and effective and helpful. Not in 10 years, not in 5 years, not in 1 year, but within a month, within weeks, within days, where a youngster is going to start to get the help that they need.
Yeah, thank you, Tina. Suzanne, Teen Parent Connection is has a particular focus, obviously. Speak a little bit about some of where we're discussing some of the mental health, mental well-being issues and your clients.
Sure. Is my mic working? Yeah, so what we have seen with the families that we serve, so we serve pregnant and parenting adolescents between the ages of 12 to 22, as well as their children.
Hold on a second. Not coming through?
Is this one working? It is. I can hear it now. So Teen Parent Connection serves pregnant and parenting adolescents ages 12 to 22 and their children 0 to 5 in DuPage County. And we have seen, you know, many of the same things that Jerry and Tina mentioned. We knew that this was an issue prior to the pandemic. That's why we started our in-house counseling program back in 2009, I believe. Because we were seeing an increase in the intensity, the frequency, the severity of the mental health needs of the families that we serve. And this has really been exacerbated by the pandemic. We are seeing more families dealing with not just anxiety and depression, which are in themselves difficult to cope with when you are even an older adult, but when you are a young parent, maybe a new parent, still trying to balance school and work, and a newborn baby, mental health challenges can just feel so overwhelming that, maybe you have to choose between attending to the needs of your child and, addressing your own mental health needs. And so that's why we have counselors that we work with. But during the pandemic, we've seen an increase in suicidal ideation. We've seen an increase in just the intensity of the clinical needs, beyond just short-term interventions, but it's acute, it is long-term, and mental health boards are incredibly important in being able to serve the residents of that community.
Right.
and we have residents, we have participants who are residents of communities across DuPage County, so.
Right. Suzanne mentioned to me when we were preparing that she just spent the last week, I think, applying for 5 grants, you said, and
Yes, I spend a lot of time applying for grants.
just this past week. And I bring that up because we've spoken in the past also about the amount of time spent by program directors, executive directors, getting resources in order to continue to do that work. So I'm going to turn to Mike for a moment to give us a brief history of 708 community mental health boards to have an understanding of where it came from, and then we'll transition into some specifics about the board's work.
Okay, I want to make one comment though, kind of about, everybody's been talking about youth, and our Bloomingdale Township Board, I'm proud to say, and recognizing this, hired a consultant, Dr. Brenda Huber, who set up a program in central Illinois that tries, our goal is going to be to screen every person, every child, starting with prenatal and even tackling postpartum depression and screening all those young people up to age 20, because it does take, like you mentioned, you want to get it right away. And I know we have weekly meetings. I think you're a part of those meetings. You can speak better than I can. But all of this started actually way back at a time when I could stay up past 10:30. I had hair way back in 1963 when I think I was a sophomore in high school, when President John F. Kennedy passed the Community Mental Health Act. And one of the goals of this act was to encourage treatment of mental illness and developmental disabilities and substance abuse in home communities rather than large state-run institutions. It used to be that places like Elgin had as many as 15,000 people in them. But the goal then was to have each community have a mental health center. But then the Vietnam War happened, and that funding dried up. So that left it up to the states to complete the job. I also want to say, as part of this, that Social Security granted the disability status to those meeting the requirements for chronic mental illness and developmental disabilities, and eventually Medicaid and other programs were made available. Our state in 1972, and if you look at our website, there's another gentleman that's pretty much a contemporary of mine, Arlen Gould, who worked in the startup of all of these programs in Illinois. But they still were largely unfunded. So that's where we are today. You know, we started the job, but we have more to do, and it's my dream that we can get it every place.
Right. Talk a little bit, Mike, about the local resources. Suzanne brought this up, and you all have felt this because you've applied for within the areas either grants and or will be applying for a community mental health grant should these boards be the referendum pass. Certainly in Milton Township now, I know that Suzanne said Teen Parent Connection has applied for one of the new grants this year, and certainly in Bloomingdale Township. What does it mean to provide local resources? Talk a little bit about that, Mike, and then maybe some examples from our other panelists on specific programs or services that you can point to where that 708 Community Mental Health Grant has helped to build a new program, because that's one of the aspects of it. It's new supportive resources, right, Mike?
Yes, they are, generally speaking, small grants. One thing that's a little bit unique about them is most grants from the federal or state government, they are for a set period of time, 3 to 5 years, and then bam, you're out. You know, you're supposed to be able to fund it yourself. Right. Our 708 board, while it's only been in existence for 4 years, I think our grants are sustaining grants. We don't expect Teen Parent Connection or NAMI to be able to figure out a way to charge their constituents for these programs. So we recognize that if these programs are meeting the needs, we need to support them. So that would be one of the biggest differences. I'd like to think, and Suzanne, you could mention if this is true as a grant writer, but I've looked at federal grants holy cow, they are so complicated. They make even computer instruction manuals look simple, you know? So I think our 708 board grants are written by people that are of the community and not maybe with the level of sophistication of a federal or state grant. And of course, being in the community, the board members can see the actual needs in a way that's different than somebody removed from the community. And that is good, bad as everything, but I think those are some of the difference. I'd be curious to hear whatever others say, since both Jerry and Suzanne have completed the grants for at least Bloomingdale Township and now Milton.
Right. Suzanne, give us an example of a grant that you can point to from Bloomingdale Township.
Sure. Yeah. So Bloomingdale Township supports. Is it working now?
Yeah. Let's move one of these
Hello,
over here.
hello.
Yep.
Uh-oh.
Does this one work? This one works. So it's going to be a theme tonight. Yes, so we are so fortunate to have received past grants from Bloomingdale Township, and they support our work, obviously, with residents of Bloomingdale Township. As I mentioned, we have participant families across the community, but we happen to have a lot of participants in that community, and so we're able to demonstrate to them that we're serving their residents. And as Mike mentioned, with community mental health boards, they understand the need of the community. They understand the people who live there. They understand the history of the community. They understand what exists in the community. So we are careful not to duplicate services. We are able to coordinate services with the other partner agencies in the community. Bloomingdale Township supports our counseling services. So I'm really proud of the counseling services that we're able to offer the young families in our parenting education and support programs. We started this, as I mentioned, back in 2009. We host 2 or 3 PsyD student externs every year, and they provide counseling services, both individual, family, couples counseling, and then group-based therapy services as part of their advanced practicum, and they're supervised by a PsyD clinical consultant that we work with. And this is really important because it removes barriers to access. All of the barriers that Jerry was talking about earlier are particularly true for the families that we work with. They tend to be low income. They are young. They are still, pursuing their own education, and working and accessing mental health care. Unfortunately, it's just something that kind of gets put on the back burner sometimes. But the need is very intense.
Right.
So it's really important to have support from the Community Mental Health Board, as Mike mentioned, that is sustaining, hopefully year after year, so we can make sure that we are being able to consistently provide those services every year.
Right. And to pick up on that, and then Jerry, if you could take this next one, and then I'll go to Tina. We talked a little bit about the need for this to sustain, because there is a journey to mental health. It doesn't happen in a short time frame, right? So Jerry, if you could talk a little bit about maybe a grant example, and then also talk about the difference between community funding like this and funding from the state or federal government. Talk a little bit about that.
Thank you. Is it working? Okay, good. Okay, let me just say a few things about 708 funding for NAMI DuPage. We've been funded since its inception. Fortunately, we're very grateful for that, in amounts that range from $20,000 to $30,000. And what that amount has enabled us to do is to go in to the schools in that township. And what is unique about the 708 board is that you are providing services only in that township. So the money that is raised, the money that is collected, goes right back to the people who live there. And it's the people who live there that decide what they want to have for services. So what we have provided, we provide youth programs in the school. And about 13 years ago, NAMI DuPage developed a program called Ending the Silence. And what's unique about our program, and this is true of all the NAMIs in every way, is that our model of treatment, of care, is that of peer services. So that means someone with a lived experience is providing, co-facilitating, providing many, if not all, of the services and programs. So when our kids hear programs in the school, there are two presenters. One of the presenters is a person with a lived experience. So
What does that mean, Jerry, lived
experience means they either have a diagnosis, a mental health diagnosis, or they have a loved one with a mental health diagnosis, and they have received special training to do this. So it's not like, you know, just tell me your story kind of thing. There's curriculum, it's structured. So when we have these programs in the school, what's so surprising to the kids is they hear about the signs and symptoms, and then the other person doing the presentation starts saying, well, when I was a junior in high school, I started to cut myself, or I started to drink, or I started taking drugs. And they tell their story. And it's that story, which is never a straight trajectory. You never go straight. And that's kind of going back to what you're saying, Erica, is that this is a chronic condition, and there's no vaccine for it. Okay, so just so you know, there's no vaccine. It's not like COVID where, you know, that may help quite a bit, but we don't have that. So it takes a lot of time and work and treatment for people to get onto recovery, and every day they have to do things to maintain their recovery, and sometimes that's not easy. So when kids hear the story from somebody in school, it's amazing because they know that there's hope for recovery. And so we do the township schools, the high schools, and the middle schools. We also have a supportive employment program. So we talk a lot about youth tonight, but most of us have programs in NAMIs. We have programs for families, and we have other kinds of programs too. And Bloomingdale Township supports our employment program because many people, as you can imagine, with a mental health, with mental illness, have difficulty either getting a job or keeping a job. And one of the stories that we had this year was a man, maybe in his early 40s, that lost his job during the pandemic, and he worked in IT, so you know there's a lot of jobs out there, but he was so anxious that he blew every interview that he had. So we had a father who does our family-to-family classes, and he has an adult son with mental illness, and he worked with this man for weeks and weeks and weeks, doing mock interviews, worked on skill sets, asking him questions, sort of meditation techniques, and the next interview, this guy got the job. So those are some of the things, that money goes toward. But what the beauty of this is, too, is that I think a lot of communities in DuPage County and everywhere probably in the country, you say, I pay all this money in taxes, but what do I get out of it? And this is something that you really benefit from, because it may not be you or your child or your neighbor today, but it might be tomorrow. And this is helping, even if you never access any of these services, you're helping your friends and neighbors, and in doing so, you're also helping your community, and that helps everybody who lives there.
Yeah. Thank you, and thanks for that example, because I think when we talk about this, and only because I've been involved with this, watching the referendum pass and now seeing the kind of grant interest that's out there, it's those individual stories and the time that it takes to bring people to a point where, again, they're back in the workforce, paying taxes again. I mean, there's a cycle to all of this that really helps bring people back to the community. Tina, talk a little bit about whether or not those small grants make a difference. 20,000, 30,000?
Okay. I'm not sure my microphone's working either, but I can project. So we are, NAMI Will Grundy, actually, we aren't eligible for 708 board funds. We don't have any 708 boards in our county. It's not working. Oh, sorry, okay. Look, is that better? Okay. And our agencies, our organization's a little bit different than some of the NAMIs. We're still pretty small, and we're all volunteers. We don't have any paid staff at NAMI Will Grundy, and so we've got,
I just want to clarify that. You have no paid staff.
Yeah, we are just volunteers, and so, and we've got some very hardworking volunteers, and we offer most of the NAMI signature programs, and we have a very aggressive schedule for our Connection program, which is support for individuals diagnosed with mental illness and family support. During the pandemic, we started a weekly online support group for Connection that has grown exponentially, and so we still maintain that weekly meeting, and then in addition, each week we have in-person support for the individuals as well as their families, Connection and family support. And we're very excited. We're getting ready to implement Ending the Silence at the high school level in January. So we don't have an opportunity to ask for money for a 708 board. And I think it's just so great that community-based organizations would have that option, because you can really react so much more quickly to something that's happening in the community. And I'll give you an example. We've had, in our local high school, we've had significant loss due to suicide. And so NAMI Will Grundy has done quite a few presentations in schools, at churches. We did an event on International Suicide Day. So we've been able to react sort of quickly to that, that situation in our county. And I think that's sort of how 708 boards, you can pretty quickly respond to something that's happening in your community. So what happens with NAMI Will Grundy, I'm humbly the not so good grant writer, but, and like Mike said, to tackle a federal grant, you need to take a class just on how to write the grant. Some of our local community mental health organizations have been generous to help us with a few things. And a state grant, you know, we apply, and we've benefited a little bit from state grants. But again, you're competing with huge community mental health organizations: Cornerstone, Thresholds, Trinity, Grand Prairie. You know, those folks have people that's all they do is write the grants. And so we've benefited somewhat from the state grants and a couple local grants that we've crossed paths with, but often we spend a lot of our volunteer time on fundraisers. And so, you know, we're frequently sitting down saying, well, wait a minute, are we a organization that raises funds, or are we an organization that supports people diagnosed with mental illness? So we kind of have to reel that in once in a while, because you know, you could spend all your time on fundraisers and still never have enough money. So we try to walk a fine line and walk that balance where a 708 board would really benefit us as a community-based organization to put us in a position to spend our time where it really benefits the community with services and educational programs and outreach and advocacy, rather than golf outings and walks. And those things are fun and they're good for awareness, but the schedule gets so jam-packed with the tasks related to fundraisers that you sort of run out of time and energy and folks to be able to do the really good work. And so that's why I think, certainly from our perspective, the availability of 708 board funds, even small grants, would be super, super helpful.
And the referendum for a 708 Community Mental Health Board will be Will County.
Correct.
Is that correct? Okay. Let's take that, and then Mike, if you can spend just a minute or two on the requirements of those 708 funds, that they have to be for new programs, services, right? And that's a difference, and one that's important, because what it means is, from my perspective at least, is that we're building programs.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the confusions and criticisms that we get, well, gee, we already fund all this stuff. This is just duplicate funding.
Right.
And by the statutes, it cannot fund something that is funded elsewhere. So you can't get double collection. I know that is a difficult concept to grasp, but the other part of it is, though, as each of you would mention, you got a million things you'd like to do. And you have to spend a ton of times dialing for dollars. And the 708 grants can partially fund a program, like with Ending the Silence and the support of a employment program or your counseling, at least for that community. So it doesn't duplicate, but it can actually provide new funding where none existed before. And that is really what's unique about it. So that's this does not duplicate anything that exists. You know, it is all new ideas, and that's one of the great things, because it is community-based. You can be a little bit experimental. The Bloomingdale board has done grants as small as $3,000 or $4,000. We're doing one right now for our churches. This hasn't been approved yet, but we're going to train all our church youth workers to identify and screen people for mental health. So that's the kind of creativity that you can try.
Right, and it provides, again, some of that seed money to build some understanding and potential efficacy for a program. I think it's really important to talk about the details of that, because one of the things when we were talking to residents in Milton Township and explaining the importance of a 708 Community Mental Health Board and exactly what that is, and kind of re-explain that, we had a lot of questions around the cost of it, right? And so this year, because this is the first year, and I wanted to share this, and then we can talk a little bit about the levy, that the question is really powerful. So in Milton Township, and by the statute, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, Mike, but the maximum allowable amount to levy in a person's property tax bill is 0.15 of 1%. So 0.15 of 1%, correct?
Yes, it is, although in Will County, that is actually the limiting rate. That's the very maximum. Will County set it at a lower rate, 0.05, and because of the tremendous property values here, that's going to be more than adequate to take care of your needs.
Right. So the point is, there can be this maximum rate is 0.15 of 1%, can be anything that or below it. In Milton Township, what the Milton Township trustees approved was a total levy amount, this is my township, of 0.0149 of 1%, right? And that, for me in my home, which is a ranch home, single family, I got my property tax bill, and one of the first things I looked at was to see what that amount is. And so for 2022-23 on my home, we're paying, my husband and I, $17.39 for the year in order to help fund and support this 708 Community Mental Health Board. And when I went to the Milton Township trustee meeting to speak in public comment and to just share that, I wanted to reinforce for the trustees and for those who would see the public comment the value of just a small amount of money and what it can do for the community. And so I think, Jerry, you're in Milton Township as well. I can't remember if you had checked your amount out. You're in Bloomingdale Township. What's yours?
Yeah, I'm in Bloomingdale Township, I'm kind of an odd duck because I really like to pay taxes because I see all the great things that it does. You know, I love our library, I love the schools. So that makes me a little bit of an odd duck, and I wish my tax rate was higher for the Mental Health Board. It is right now 0.0216 or whatever. It winds up to be a whopping $15.56, and in our community of 100,000 people that we raised $1 million. So I know I took my grandchildren, we're visiting from Portland, and the first thing they always ask to do is to go to Portillo's. Would you believe that? And I like to try and be a good grandpa. I only see them a little bit, so I always say, get the works, whatever you want, kids. So they get the large chocolate shake, you know, all the thing. The bill for my 4 grandchildren was $82.
Right.
So this is such a small amount, and it really is transformative in the lives of the people that it serves.
Right,
So-
right. I believe we're collecting some questions, Susan. So I'm going to, in a moment, I'm going to turn it over to let you ask some of the questions from our audience here tonight. And thank you so much for coming and for your questions. Suzanne, I want to go back to you for just a moment, back to Teen Parent Connection. And I have a question about gaps. So when you think of a gap in services from where you were and where you are, again, how does now the Milton Township 708 Community Mental Health Board, how might that help close some of those gaps?
Yeah, that's a great question. It means that we are able to serve more families. It means that we're able to get families off of wait lists for counseling services. It means we're able to provide the resources that are needed specifically in that community. You know, you mentioned the other sources of funding. You know, foundation funds, as we all know, those vary from year to year. You know, a lot of foundations use their, they may have an endowment, they may have, you know, investments that they're using to fund their grants, and that is very unpredictable, especially, you know, with our current economic volatility. So having, you know, funds that are dedicated to that community, to meeting the need in that community for residents of that community is incredibly important in filling those gaps.
Right, thank you. I also want to say that for Bloomingdale Township, and now looking at Milton Township 708 Community Mental Health Board, one of the really important aspects of this is following up with those grantees and making sure that the grant for which they've been funded is in fact dedicating those dollars, so there's an accountability, again, localized, to making sure that that is done. Is that an accurate statement, Jerry?
Yes.
Pass this down. Speak to that for just a minute, and then we'll transition into some of our questions.
Yes, I think that that's really a key at the Bloomingdale Township meetings where the 708 board decides on the grants. Before that, the week, 2 weeks or 3 weeks before that, they have the nonprofits come in and they ask questions. And the question, I've been going to these meetings for quite a few years now, and the question that is always asked is, how can you show that this is a Bloomingdale Township resident that will receive this service? Because we can't fund anything that is not for a Bloomingdale resident. And so we make sure on the schools we serve are all, you know, for this grant are all in the township. We go by zip codes on everybody that we provide service to make sure that they are in we have their addresses, and we check that. And so we provide back, you know, information so that it's verifiable that we are doing what we say that we're doing. And I'll tell you this, for people that are getting these services, when you're a small nonprofit, like NAMI DuPage too is that you rely on your grants to determine a lot of what your services will be. And I can say, because when we get grants, I want to make sure that we are fully 100% complying with what we said we're going to do. So if we get a grant from Bloomingdale Township, that money's going to be spent on Bloomingdale Township. But I'll tell you this, if we didn't get that grant, we wouldn't be, we'd probably provide some services, but we certainly would never be providing the numbers that we see, and the amount of services that we give to Bloomingdale residents would not be possible if not for that grant.
Right. I want to encourage anyone who has a question, especially because the Bloomingdale Township 708 Community Mental Health Board has been in place for now 5th year coming
I
up?
think this is the
Fifth year.
2017 it passed.
Right, to go on Bloomingdale Township website, and there's a link specifically to the 708 Community Mental Health Board. It will give you a nice history of the grants, the types of things that are funded, the amounts. So for those who don't have a 708 board in their community, you'll get a kind of a view of that as well.
I should say we're a fledgling board in Bloomingdale. I'm sitting in for Cheryl Potts, who is from the Oak Park Board, and they've been in existence since the beginning, since the 1970s.
Yep.
And when you look at the tremendous things that they do, you grow as a mental health. Every organization grows over time. And we're just getting started. I can't wait to see the many great things that are going to be accomplished in Will and Grundy County. But it takes time to develop. And in the 4 townships in DuPage that are right now have referendum. We have Naperville, we have Lyle, we have Addison, and we have Winfield. This can transform the lives of those communities. Bring them together. Really, this is a look at the heart of your community. That's what this is about.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. We have some questions.
Questions? Why do we need a mental health board? Doesn't the county offer mental health services?
Who would like to speak to that? Jared?
Hi, Nami DuPage, our offices, we rent space from the health department. And I have tremendous, I guess even affection, I would say, for the DuPage Health Department, because I think they have wonderful people that work for them, and they do wonderful work. And people will say to me, well, we have the health department, we have the county. But, you know, to get services from the health department, because like everybody, there's a limit, okay, to resources they have. You have to be, for mental health services, behavioral health services, you have to be on Medicare or Medicaid. That's not most people in the county. So they do what they can. You're still gonna wait a long time for a psychiatrist or many other programs, and they do a great job with what they have, but they can't do everything. And most of the services that we're talking about at Bloomingdale that have been awarded, those aren't things that the health department even does, like our youth programs in the school, our supportive employment, your teen parent. The things that we're talking about are not things that the health department has taken on, and so that's who we would be talking about for county services. So, I mean, I'm glad I'm a DuPage County resident. I think we have wonderful services, but this isn't something to put on to the county. And I would also suggest to people, is that whenever you have, the bigger the area that you go with funding, the less likely it is that it's going to be you or your neighbors to get it.
Because it's dispersed.
Because it's going to be dispersed to the greatest need, usually. So for many people, you know, I'm a resident of Milton Township too, and I think if people didn't realize that they would be getting the services in this township, all the money stays in the township, I don't think it would have passed. So when you're talking about countywide, the county is going to go to where the greatest need is, right? Isn't that what you do? And it may not be your community. And it's probably, and it's not going to be the same services that we have here. So it's a wonderful complement to what they already do.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I agree. And in Will County, the Will County Health Department does excellent work, quality programs, certainly wants to be devoted to service in the community. And again, their behavioral health department is growing. They're doing a really good job. But let me give you an analogy about the cruelty of mental illness. Mental illness is not like some of the other medical illnesses where you go to the hospital and you get medicine or tests and you get cured and you go home. Mental illness, again, the cruelty of mental illness is that it's an ongoing, lifelong challenge. One consumer said to me one day that having a mental illness for him is like waking up in the morning and facing a down escalator, that he has to climb that down escalator every day. And if he adheres to his medication regimen, eats well, gets some sleep, maybe gets a little bit of exercise, sees his psychiatrist, participates in peer support, has natural and family supports in the community, things go pretty well, and he can navigate that down escalator pretty easily. He can get up that challenge every day. But as things fall away, if he doesn't adhere to his medication regimen, or maybe family's not available, he sleeps too much one week and he doesn't see peer support. As things start to fall away, the challenge of that mental illness makes it almost impossible to navigate that down escalator. You need a comprehensive array of services to tackle this challenge. And so you go to your medical doctor for those needs, or things that are associated perhaps with the triggers of mental health that become medical illnesses or nutritional challenges. You see your health club for the physical fitness issues. You have support from your families. You have support from your local mental health department and psychiatrists, and maybe you come to NAMI for peer support. So that wide array of services is what creates a community where people can be successful navigating this cruel existence of a mental illness. And so, again, 708 boards, unlike some of these bigger tax-supported facilities or community support programs, can address more quickly some of the smaller demographics, certainly. Just because you have a mental health program doesn't mean people diagnosed with a mental illness will show up. Sometimes it takes a lot of outreach. At NAMI Will Grundy, we each have a list of consumers that we sort of try to mentor or kind of, take under our wing and check in every week or so. How are things going? What's happening? What's going on? The kinds of grants that a 708 board allows for that kind of attention and individual supports that really aren't available at some of the larger community mental health support programs. And so it allows for more outreach to Black and Brown communities, where culturally it's a very difficult sell to have folks come in for services. So it's not in lieu of community mental health or the health department. Exactly,
It's a
Jerry.
complement.
It enhances what's already offered too.
Tina, thank you for describing some of that detail. That's great.
So how are 708 mental health boards staffed for services? Are there a certain number of people? What is the setup?
This is a good question to clarify.
Okay, this is what's hard to grasp because each mental health board is unique. We've talked about them in township, like McHenry County, which is a comparable size as Will, has funds all their programs through 708 funding. And one of the things, and then I'm going to answer that question because this is all related to it. The way that they're staffed depends on the the organization. Like in Bloomingdale,
But clarify, Mike, staffing in terms of paid positions. Community mental health boards,
you usually have way lower overhead
Right.
because the board itself is a pass-through agency, okay? So there is only the review of the grants, for instance, in Bloomingdale, and the accounting procedure. So it's less than a typical organization.
and the 708 Community Mental Health Board members are appointed. These
Yes.
are volunteers. They're not staffed in terms of a paid position. And so what you're describing is once the board is established through the county or township or city or village, and that is staffed, there might be a grant coordinator part-time position that would be paid, that type of thing, Mike.
Right, and that would depend, like, I'm certain, on a county level like Will County, you'd want to have somebody that really was checking up, and there's a variety of grants, too. I think we have 8 different grants in Bloomingdale Township, ranging from capital grants for equipment to supportive employment, where it's just to hire a person. Like, we put social workers in every police department. We didn't have them in Bloomingdale Township, and that's been something that's really changed.
So a paid position would be that oversight role to coordinate the grant process, to make sure there's oversight that the grants are doing, as you said earlier, what they're doing. But the overhead, quote unquote, or the cost is nominal. And sometimes the township or the county will cover some of that as well as a complementary function. So the members of the 708 board are volunteers. They are not paid positions. And so it's a very, very low cost administrative, if any cost at times, administrative role.
Yeah, they're all part-time employees that would be doing other jobs in the case of the township.
Right.
Because we only have $1 million. Now, if you get a larger agency.
Right.
like-
You might have to hire a director, et cetera, but again, it's all sized or scaled depending on what the needs are. Yeah, good question.
Mental health boards work with local police departments, paramedics, fire departments on responding to mental health issues.
Yes, they do. Jerry, do you want to take that quickly? It's still on.
Okay, as far as the 708 boards themselves, 708 boards, what they really do is support nonprofits who are working with. They don't directly intervene and have policies, because most of the people on 708 boards are just working people, community leaders that know that this is a valuable service and they want to be part of it. So the 708 board doesn't really establish, they don't really, they may fund police social workers, or, yeah, they could fund a CIT programs, crisis intervention training, those kinds of things. But their role really is in funding.
Right.
So the nonprofit comes up with the idea of what they want to do. For example, this doesn't happen to be funded by Bloomingdale Township, but we have a program where we work with 9 police departments in DuPage County, and we have our peers or individual peers or family peers work with people involved in police calls in those towns. That would be something that we could ask for to be funded
Right.
by a township. That
Right.
we haven't asked for that, but we could. But that would be how 708 would become involved with police departments.
Right.
Because they wouldn't be doing the outreach. They're not policymakers.
Right.
They're people that volunteer their time because they know that there's a shortage of services in mental health, substance use, and developmental disabilities.
It's a good clarifying question because, again, a 708 Community Mental Health Board is a group of volunteers doing the work of working with the Community Mental Health Act and the bylaws that they establish, et cetera. But it is, they identify through the grant requests those grants that will then be used to work with police departments, fire departments, first responders, et cetera. Yeah. Quick follow-up?
quick follow-up.
Okay, then we'll go to another question.
Okay, yeah, the statute serves communities that are rural, that might be 30 or 40,000 people, and then large metropolitan areas like St. Clair County, McHenry County, DuPage County. So there's a great deal of variety. There's a great deal of variety, and it took me at least a year to understand and grasp that this flexibility is the virtue of it.
Yeah. Question?
What are some of the possible ways for churches, temples, other places of worship to partner with 708 boards?
Ways for churches, repeat the question? Yeah, churches of worship and to actually partner with 708 boards. I think if I can at least initially respond to that, and then you can give some insight from Bloomingdale Township, it would be doing what Jerry was just describing, which is to work with a nonprofit agency there might be an organization within the house of worship, the church, the synagogue, et cetera, that could identify a way to apply for a grant. There might be a nonprofit that they're working with, say a food pantry, and the food pantry could apply for a grant in terms of support with their community. So there are ways to partner. When Reverend Zaki and I were speaking, he said with such clarity that this is all about partnership and collaboration and creating alliances. And so as you get to know more about the opportunity that a 708 Community Mental Health Board provides, that's where the creativity comes from. Is there an example of one, Mike, from Bloomingdale? I can't think of one directly.
Well, like I mentioned, we did have Bloomingdale Church apply for a grant to train all the youth workers from all the religious institutions, at least in terms of, we do fund a therapist for the Islamic Charities of North America, and that has been a tremendous help. That's a community, and it's open to the whole community, not just to them, but there was an unmet need there. So you look for that unmet need. A lot of nonprofits like Teen Parent Connection, they frequently meet, and you meet at churches, your groups. So the originality that any church could have, the 708 board offers the flexibility to present that idea.
Right.
And unlike a bigger state or federal program, you have the chance to make your case in person.
Yeah. I think we have time for maybe a couple more questions.
What specific reasons, root causes, do you see for the increase in adolescent suicide as of before the pandemic?
Did you hear the question?
Well, one of the greatest issues that we have, and I was just at a seminar on this the other day where I had to speak a little bit about it, addressed the new stresses. New since I was a kid, which wouldn't be. A lot of it has to do with internet and cyber bullying. In the old days, if kids were always bullied, okay, we know that. But you went home and you had a safe haven. Now there's nowhere you can go because whatever you did is going to be circulated, for a lot of these kids. So I would say that's one of the greatest issues. We also live in a different society, the technology, the phones, I think people are far more rushed than they ever used to be. There are a lot more pressures on people, a lot more pressures on parents. So that certainly funnels through to kids. You're talking about colleges that kids are preparing for from the time they're in 5th or 6th grade practically. It's getting younger and younger. Oh, if I don't get an A, I won't get into this college. So there are a lot of pressures for kids that have really grown so tremendously since, even in the last 20 years. It really is different.
Yeah.
Does anybody?
Yeah, similarly, there was a time where child development would say that age 10 years old is the perfect age. That's when a kid is going to be the happiest they'll ever be. And now, like I said earlier, we're talking about that's the average onset of anxiety disorders. Children are really struggling, and services haven't progressed nearly as much as the challenges. You know, we're just not recognizing in our kids the level of support that they need, and so it's a 24/7 world for them now. You know, like we said, when we were kids, you'd go home and sort of left everything at the door, right? And now when we saw during the pandemic the domestic violence that's occurring for children, and so sometimes they're not even getting a break when they walk through the back door at night. So, and again, we're just not growing or getting more sophisticated in terms of our services to that young person as to meet the same level of challenges that are growing.
I would say this is where also our school districts, at least the ones I'm familiar with in DuPage County, and I know in these areas too, have done a really good job of recognizing the need to increase their professional school social workers, psychologists in the building, and this is where some of these grants have been really impactful. The year before the pandemic, I believe it was one of the school districts in Bloomingdale Township that you funded those school social worker positions that shared services. So you increased your FTE, your full-time equivalent of a social worker, by 0.5 or one full person. That makes a huge difference. And so again, 708 Community Mental Health grants for that township made a significant difference. Yeah.
There was a time when we said that 1 in 4 of us struggle at any given time with the symptoms of mental illness. Since the pandemic, when we talk about ages 14 to 18, now we're saying that 2 in 5, 2 in 5 children struggle with emerging signs and symptoms of mental illness. Yeah. And so, you know, the Ending the Silence program, I think it's worth mentioning. I was lucky enough to observe a couple of the Ending the Silence programs sponsored by NAMI DuPage, and it's a fantastic, it's just a wonderful program. I can't wait to get going in Will County schools. Like Jerry described, a leader gives some general information about mental illness and, you know, a message that this is not your fault. This is nothing that you've done. This is not as a result of some weakness on your part, and gives a little, you know, just enough education for a child to be able to pay attention that long. And then again, a peer, a person who has been there, done that, has lived experience, gets a little bit of information. And so it's about a 50-minute program altogether, so not too long, but really quality information. And the couple of the classes that I observed, the leader gave the educational portion, the peer support person spoke, and then the peer support person said, does anybody have any questions? And almost without exception, every kid in the room, it was in a library, little section of the library, hand shot up. And they all had valid, thoughtful, pertinent questions about mental health, or questions about how to get help for a loved one or a friend, or even on a few very brave youngsters talked about some of the things that they were thinking and their own challenges. So
it created a safe space for that.
It did. It did. It was terrific. And so then, you know, in a leadership role at our NAMI, I think, oh, great, we're going to be implementing this program. This is wonderful. And then I go home and think, okay, now wait a minute. We're saying, okay, talk to a trusted adult, talk to a peer. And then, so we have Ending the Silence. Well, wait a minute. Now, what happens when they want to come some more and talk some more? Well, we don't have adolescent, connection or adolescent age peer support groups. So I thought, we got to do better.
That's where the grant could
We've
come
got to
in.
do better. So that's a perfect example of the type of situation where we could have a grant to fund a social worker, professional support person to come in and provide follow-up professional support for this wonderful program that we're going to be generating interest in.
Thank you, Tina. Okay, quickly, one last question.
One last question, this is a hard one. How much is this going to cost? 0.15% sounds like a lot.
0.15 of 1%.
Yeah,
Not,
just to be
not
clear on that.
1.15% of 1%. So just a teeny tiny part of 1%.
Okay, Mike.
Okay, we mentioned this before, but first of all, in Will County, they set the limiting rate at 0.05. So
Of 1%.
of 1%. No mental health board in the metropolitan area, none charges 0.15%.
Which is the ceiling.
Yes, so in Bloomingdale, it was like 0.00018 or something, very low. So that is not gonna be the real rate, that's the limiting rate. Why don't we put that on there? Because you don't know what the future is gonna be. So that 30 years from now, and that amount is very small, it would be about what, on a 0.15 and a $300,000 home, which is roughly the average in Bloomingdale Township, would be $150. Now, my home is roughly in that range, and as I mentioned, I'm paying $15.
15.
Yeah, 15. Now I get the homeowner's allowance, and you might not believe it, but I get the senior discount too. So, you know, so that is one of the I would call it exaggerated points that critics of mental health board bring up, and it's mentioned in our Fact or Fiction website out there. So that's just a false thing. And the other thing that, if you didn't get it, that every dollar you invest in this winds up saving money over the long run. So you can pay now or you can pay later. We pay for mental health care in crisis situation, hospitalization, and medication, and those are the three most expensive areas. The 708 boards looks at those other areas to try and prevent those situations.
Right, trying to get ahead of it. It's a great question. So we've kept us over a little bit. Great questions, thank you. And I want to thank all of our panelists. Great information. We recognize when we are supporting a community mental health board that that is a cost to us as taxpayers and residents. And what we're hoping tonight to have presented to you was to give you an understanding of what happens as a result of that levy. But that also it can be, as in my case, of $17, I live in the city of Wheaton, and 39 cents per year, that has provided $800,000 totally in Milton Township for grants. So my 17 and my neighbor's 17 or 32 or whatever it might be for the year is a collective support, and that levy is determined every year by your township trustees in my case, and so it's discussed, and it's not a given every year, and so that could certainly change, and so the power of the control is within the township. And it's certainly...
It can only increase by a small amount.
It can only increase by a small amount, exactly. So the statutes in the state of Illinois provide that cap. Yeah, about $1.50 a month, yeah, exactly. So I want to thank you all, our panelists, for coming out here, and Reverend Zaki and your community here for welcoming us, and also the support to be able to live stream this and to have a recording. Encourage you to go on, again, the Bloomingdale Township website to look at specifically their 708 Community Mental Health Board. Milton Township, we're in our first year of grants. It'll give you a little sense of what we look like in terms of our funding guidelines, et cetera. And encourage you to go on 708 Boards for Mental Health, which is a Facebook page that they can take a look at, and Advocates for 708, where you can pop in a question, and we're happy to get back to you. So thank you so much for coming out tonight, and for those who will be watching and watching the recording, we thank you. Thank you. Thank you.